Hello viewers, I've just been issued with a severe storm warning, electrical storm warning, southeast Queensland, Australia, that time of the year. And on my YouTube I do a lot of nature walking, hiking and that sort of thing, to learn a bit more about animal life and nature and what it can tell us. Now behind me is one of our mulberry trees. Usually has a lot of parrots in it, small birds, that sort of thing. You may be able to hear some thunder rumbling in the background. On cue, no, it's not going to happen. Alright, they're gone. They're just gone, okay? We've seen some pink galahs, a whole flock of them heading that way east, and they're out of here. So, it's nothing new. It's something I want to talk about in a few seconds, about what nature can tell you about daily weather events, maybe weeks, months, or even years ahead. It used to be done in the old indigenous cultures. See you in a few seconds. Back again. Okay, if we look throughout history, particularly in the colonisation of the New World by European powers, the indigenous people of the lands that were colonised, they survived for hundreds, thousands of years. And part of the culture was being able to read the weather on a daily basis. Their very survival depended on it. You know, whether they were nomadic cultures, or partly nomadic, you know, like in some parts of South America and those sort of places, they built cities. You know, they studied astronomy long before Europeans had a basic understanding of it, generally speaking. Okay. In Australia, North America, Asia, Africa, the old cultures, the indigenous cultures of the time, could read the weather even better than what modern technology can do now. And this helped them move and prepare for hunting, prepping for severe weather, climate changes. What I mean by is some countries have a very severe winter. Some have very short spring and summer months, and they spend all that time in the warmer months preparing for the coming winter. And quite often they'll move to a winter retreat, and that's where they'll stay. But the main thing is they've got to have all the supplies there ready to carry them through the winter, particularly if it's a severe one. Here in Australia it's not such a problem where I live, but we do have severe weather. Unfortunately these days, with the advance of Western civilization in colonial days, treated the indigenous cultures like crap, second-rate citizens. You know, it was voodoo, it was anti-religion and all this sort of stuff. A lot of that knowledge has been lost. And even today, with Western influence on indigenous cultures, it's very, very hard to find people that are still practicing part of their culture. So I'll give it an example, and I'm not standing up on my own matchbox here. When I was about 10, I was living in a place called Townsville, far north Queensland. And yes, we have the normal tropical, subtropical storms and wet weather, and back in those days in the 60s, yeah, it was Cyclone Alley, we had the monsoons and all the rest of it. And then one day, I was out in the yard, I was living in an urban area, and this ice fell out of the sky. I didn't know what the hell it was, first time I'd ever seen it. So I raced into my dad and I said, "What the hell is this?" I didn't actually swear, but you know what I mean. And he said, "That's hail." Now he's been living up and down the east coast of Australia, so he knew what hail was. I'd never seen it before in my life. I thought the sky was falling in or something like that. So since then I've had, it's been an interest of mine to, as an amateur weather watcher. Combined with that, on my YouTube, as I mentioned before, I do a lot of hiking, camping in the bush, that sort of stuff. I have done it since I was 10 years old. And as I progressed through age, in my teenage years, I started to see things that nature was telling us about weather events. Whether, as I said before, daily event, could be weekly, whether it's coming, a seasonal change coming in a few months' time, or in one case, it was about 2 or 3 years ahead of time, believe it or not. And I'll tell you why. Back in 2008, we had a block of land, off-grid block of land, and we were practicing bushcraft and all the basic stuff there. It was off-grid, no power or anything, so we're learning to cook on open campfires and all the rest of it, and yada yada yada. In 2008 we were in a very severe drought here in Australia. Some say it was one of the worst droughts in generations. Okay. Around about late 2008 I started to notice slight changes in animal life. Now we had birds, we had wallabies and kangaroos and all the rest of it. But there were subtle changes at first. Termite nests either on the ground, and there was some in the trees. They started off started to develop, the ones in the trees, and it's not unusual to find termite nests in the trees, but these were surprising for that area because they were built externally very high up a tree, and they kept building them. It was fresh mud, whatever they used to build their termite nests. Even the ones on the ground were expanding their nests and reinforcing them. As time went on, 2009, we started to see things ramp up as far as what I observed in nature. Different bird life. Things like a bush turkey. Okay, we had a dormant bush turkey mound. They're a ground nesting bird here in Australia. We had a dormant one up near the campsite, and about late 2009, that turkey was seen up around that dormant nest site and was on high ground. As time went on, 2009 into 2010, the summer of 2009, 2010 was a very hot, humid summer, stormy, and started noticing other things like behavioural changes in insects. Now many people here that are viewing this may realise, or I have experienced, that in extremely wet weather, ants are usually the first ones that you notice. They're up in your house, getting into stuff. They might be up in ceilings and walls. My place here, where there's some ants in the house, but my radio shack was absolutely chock-a-block full of them, and getting into radio equipment and so on. But ant activity out in the yard was very, very high, unusually high. Around about 2010, the government at the time, both state and federal governments, were having meetings behind closed doors initially about a record La Niña. Now, if you know anything about the Pacific Ocean, you've got La Niña and El Nino events. Typically La Niña events for the Western Pacific, particularly Australia, given the position of where it is, usually means a lot of wet weather, flooding range, you name it. Plus we had a very, very positive Indian Ocean dipole. So in about April of 2009, it was April 2010, I was at my daughter's place. Around about, it was April. And I was just outside walking around, having a look around and watching the ants and other insects and all that sort of stuff. And I noticed the ants moving their eggs to higher ground. Now these are the little black house ants that quite often, you get in your house or you see around your yard. They're harmless, but they were starting to move their eggs, and they were moving them to higher ground. This is reinforced again by when we were out at our off-grid property camping in 2010. Probably not long after that, the red ants, or what we call meat ants. Man, there were millions of them. I finished counting after the first million. I really did. well, so to speak. But it was like an auto barn. They were just going nuts, collecting food, materials for their nests, making their nest bigger because they're an in-ground ant. They have their nest in the ground, and they were cleaning it out, emptying all this crap out of it, bringing all this food in and expanding their nests on high ground. And they were so active that typically red ants, if you get in your way, they'll climb up your leg or they might give you a bit of a nip. They're not poisonous or anything, they're quite good bush tucker actually. But no, not these guys. It was like an auto barn. You could see where they were tracking right back to their nest, carrying food and other materials for their nest. They pushed all the dirt out of the way, the sand, you know, all that sort of stuff, and it was right back to bare clay. You know, the strip was about an inch long in some wide in some places. We had a very mild, wet winter in 2010, and that's when the state and federal government started to make it public that they were making preparations, making sure all emergency services were ready for the upcoming very, very wet season during the spring and the summer. And it did happen. Yeah. It was on the international news, Toowoomba floods. We were in Toowoomba at the time, we'd just gone in now. I said to my wife that morning, I said, we had to take somebody in there. And I said, I've got this real hinky feeling about today. I said, if we're going to go into Toowoomba, let's go now and get the hell out of there. We got there, had a cup of coffee, and I said, well, what, we've got to go now. We've got to go now. There's something wrong, I can feel it. And we got out of Toowoomba with about half an hour to spare before the floods went through. Intuition? I don't know. You tell me. So, and then we had a very wet, and the floods were bad. It didn't really affect our place here. We were prepped for it. We were very well prepped. But many towns on the east coast, even inland areas, Queensland, New South Wales, yeah, it was a very wet, disastrous flooding situation. And many towns were evacuated more than once. So, you know, that's my experience. I'm not standing up, I'm not always right. I'm still learning. Hey, I'm in my mid-60s, somewhere thereabouts, and I'm still learning. So, what does that mean? Okay. It means that nature can tell us a lot about coming weather events. In that situation, after a long drought, very subtle at first, then we started to notice changes in wildlife, insects, even some plant life. The way they flowered or didn't flower, when they flowered or didn't flower. So nature in its way, and it goes back to the old indigenous civilizations, can tell us a lot about the weather. It's the wildlife internet. It's much better than ours. In recent times, yes, we've got the Bureau of Meteorology here in Australia, or commonly called the bomb site. Oops, there goes another keyboard. Don't worry about it. It's not one of them things that goes bang. Got to keep telling those guys. Sometimes they get it right, and with the technology of weather forecasting these days, it's still rather hit and miss. They don't really understand the complexities of weather events. The ancients, the older civilizations, yes, they had a much better understanding, and their very survival depended on, as I said. Most of the time they were right. Sometimes they weren't. They got it wrong. Sometimes I get it wrong. I got a camera trashed earlier this year. I was storm watching, and I had listened to the weather forecast, tracked it on radar, and this storm came in right over the top of us, and it intensified very, very fast. Caught everybody by surprise. I was up on a hill, got hail, wind, and trashed a camera. The point I'm trying to make is prepping and survival. If you don't have access, or there's a long-term grid down, or something catastrophic happens and you don't have access to modern technology, There are ways that you can look at the weather, you can look at nature. She'll tell you what's going to happen. Days, weeks, months, even a couple of years ahead. And this video is on the back of survival and prepping for normal people. I watched one of his videos this morning. He did lightly touch on the subject. Very good channel, I recommend him. And this is a shout out to his channel. Every day, disaster scenarios we face, okay, it's weather related. That's what we're working on. We face that every day. It can change on a dime, or a 5-cent piece they call it in Australia. But if you take the time and do the research, you may just find that nature will tell you what's going on. My dogs, I've got 2 dogs, beautiful dogs, spoiled to death. One of them, she can tell you there's a bad storm coming, clear sky in the morning, before it even gets here. She gets restless, she gets anxious, and she's starting to find places to hide in the house. Maybe some of you have pets that are sensitive to weather, sudden weather changes. Some animals are sensitive to earthquakes. I'll just mention that. You or friend had a cat have an earthquake on the other side of the planet, big one, and this cat used to go nuts 24 hours before the earthquake happened. So nature can tell you out there, and it's not black magic, it's not, you know, burn you at the stake, it's not anti-religion, it's common sense. Civilizations have been doing it for thousands of years. Really. Look into it, research it, make your own observations, see what you think. Talk to Indigenous people who still have that part of their culture. You'd be surprised. Alright. Thank you, viewers. I'll see you later.